I'm James Kahn, and these are my stories. My first story is about the year 1970, which was a really big year for me. It was the year I graduated college. I was supposed to graduate in 69, but there were some things along the way, so I graduated in 70. And then a few months later, I started medical school. It was the year that I sold my first short story ever to a magazine, to Playboy magazine. And it was the year that I assaulted the Queen of Belgium. The story I sold to Playboy actually was based on a true event. It's on page 123, right after the centerfold and before the Girls of Holland, which was my cousin Doug got a job as a mailman in Chicago for a summer. And he was going to a corner mail drop box at one point, and he used his key and opened it up and started taking the letters out to put in his sack to take back to the post office. And just then, a bunch of guys started strolling up and laughing and saying, "Hey, there's Uncle Sam. Let's see, does Uncle Sam live in the mailbox? I bet he does. Let's take Uncle Sam home and put him back in the mailbox." So they started stuffing him into this actual corner mailbox. Fortunately for him, a police car cruised by and they all ran off, and Doug got out and went along his way. But after he told me that story, it made me wonder, well, what if he had been stuffed in that mailbox? What would have happened then? It seemed like the beginning of a good story. And a lot of my stories begin with a what if kind of question. So I wrote this short story, imagining if he had been stuffed in the mailbox. And I sent it into a short story contest my senior year in college. And it took second prize, which was a little piece of paper saying you took second prize. But one of the judges, Daryl Hine, who was the editor of Poetry Magazine in Chicago, a fine poetry magazine, liked it enough that he, without anyone knowing, sent it to a friend of his, Roby McCauley, who was the fiction editor at Playboy Magazine. And Roby liked it and bought it. And the first I knew about any of this was I got a check in the mail for $3,000, which was a stunning amount back when I was a college student, and is still a lot of money to me. I felt like that was the beginning of my writing career, and I was really excited about being a professional writer. Of course, following that, I sent off dozens and dozens of stories to magazines, which always got rejected, so it kind of killed that idea for a while. But meanwhile, I was doing research at the Sleep Lab at the University of Chicago. Did research there of various kinds, including implanting electrodes into rat brains and stuff I wouldn't exactly do anymore. But most of my research was in ESP, which anecdotally is related to dreaming. But that's a whole other story that I'm not going to tell now. Suffice it to say, I did my research, and then that year turned out to be a big year for sleep research because the APSS, which is the Association for the Psychophysiological Study of Sleep, was having its first ever international symposium that year. And it was being held in Belgium, which was a big deal for Belgium because the inventor of sleep research was a Belgian guy named Bremer. And there was a grant at our sleep lab for the intern to go, so that was me, so I went. And several of us went to Belgium, and we got there on a Saturday, I think. We just got over jet lag and wandered around town for a couple days, and the meetings were scheduled to start at noon on Monday. So Monday morning I was wandering around the city, and it was drizzling and cloudy and kind of dark. And I was wearing a long raincoat, a London fog that I had bought used. And I was walking up the steps, wide stone steps of the provincial palace, and looking up and just admiring the stained glass windows when I was all of a sudden aware of a big commotion behind me. So I turned and I saw there was a mob in the square rushing the palace. And I tensed up and I was kind of freaked out because this was the time when there were protests all over the world about the American incursion into Cambodia or Laos and protesting the expansion of the Vietnam War. And I figured they knew there were a lot of Americans at this conference and they were going to grab me and protest. So I was kind of freaked. But then I realized it wasn't an angry mob, it was a cheerful mob, and they were crowding around the Queen, who was walking up the steps at that moment, Queen Fabiola of Belgium. And she was a chic queen, like Jackie Kennedy. She wore a little pink pillbox hat and a Dior suit, and she had a bouquet of flowers in her arms, and when she reached the step that I was on, she paused and smiled and walked up to me and extended her hand to shake. So here's the thing. I was staying at a bed and breakfast, and that morning at breakfast I'd had my cappuccino or latte and the croissant, but there was still a roll on the table, so I cut the roll open and smeared this great Belgian jam all over it and put it in my pocket. And when the crowd had rushed the steps and I tensed inadvertently, I'd reflexively gripped what was in my pocket. So when I pulled my hand out to shake her hand, it was holding this jelly roll. So we both looked at it kind of in dismay and confusion. And she didn't know what I was doing, and I thought, put it in my left hand to shake my right, but at that moment, being a clever woman herself, she put the flowers in her right hand to shake her left. And now we were as perplexed as ever. And then, in a moment that lasted what felt like a couple hours, it seemed like we were going back and forth exchanging rolls and flowers to our different hands until I finally saw my moment. Both of our right hands were free, and I gripped her hand to shake, and there was this sticky jelly connecting us. And I smiled kind of limply, and she said something in Flemish, which I imagine we can all imagine what it might have been. And she walked up the steps to make her opening remarks for the conference, and I followed, and the conference began. And that's how I assaulted the Queen of Belgium in 1970, which was my year of firsts.